Surprise, it's me again. I told you I would be here a bit, so we're moving into our first plenary of the day. The programming has officially begun. This piece we just witnessed reminds me so much of Breath, right? It's a movement piece, it's a dance piece, it's a visual piece, and all I can think about is the room to breathe. I hope you remember to take a breath as we go through the day. We're talking about big things at the big conference. Some things are hard. They have to be hard, otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? Needing to have these conversations. So in a moment, we're shifting gears into the first of the three themes of this conference. Theme 1 is building intersectional coalitions, and the panel that you're about to witness is the beginning point, the launch pad for that theme. Afterwards, the breakout sessions that are happening all dig into different components of what will be surfaced within this plenary. We're talking about intersectionality because intersectionality deepens our work, right? We don't live as like one singular, I have this one identity and nothing else exists. That's why intersectionality matters. We're complicated, we're full. Our justice work needs to put that complexity up front and center. This panel, you're about to hear some incredible thinkers, organizers who are all in the basic income space, and they're all going to offer some sort of meditation, a response, if you will, to this prompt. If cash is power, then, okay? I'm gonna give some brief bios. They're gonna come one by one and say their stuff, and then we'll have a little conversation. It's gonna be very cute. So first, let's give a round of applause to Maddox Gorilla who we're gonna hear from in a moment. Maddox is from Point Source Youth, is a senior consultant of social impact visionary, and from my home space as well, the concrete jungle that is New York City, allow it. Maddox believes in the idea of protopia, the idea that every day we can actively work towards the world we want to see. As a trans Afrofuturist, the intersection of his work is the role imagination plays in ending youth homelessness by investing in solutions that put resources into the hands of youth. Being a co-founder of Direct Cash Transfers as an intervention to end youth homelessness, he fiercely continues to lead the narrative forward on why we should trust young people and disrupt the disparities marginalized communities constantly face. Maddox, yes. I'm gonna do everybody's intro, okay? Is that all right with y'all? Well, we're gonna keep it flowing, and then Maddox will come up on stage. Next, after Maddox, we'll hear from Nicole Laporte from Equity and Transformation, Director of Communications, shout out Chicago, right here, yes. Nicole is a Chicago native that has been involved in informal work throughout her life as a visual artist and graphic designer. As an artist, she is frequently involved in community outreach, youth art education initiatives, as well as centering social justice topics in her artwork. In 2019, Nicole joined Chicago non-for-profit Equity and Transformation, one more time for EAT, yes, as the Director of Communications. Prior to that, she had firsthand experience with the barriers that a prior felony conviction has had in her gaining formal employment and the criminalization she has faced within the informal workforce. Her position at EAT has allowed her to live out her life's passion in advocating for system-impacted individuals and against the systems that criminalize them and leaves communities disenfranchised and underrepresented. Shout out to Nicole. Talk about important work, right? Okay. After that, we're gonna hear from Amy Durrence, yes, is the Director of Systems Change Initiatives at FreeFrom. Hello, let's go. Okay, a national nonprofit working to create pathways to financial security and long-term safety with and for survivors of gender-based violence. Since 2020, FreeFrom has given $1.93 million directly to over 7,000 survivors from across the US through the Safety Fund program, the only national no-strings-attached cash assistance fund for survivors in this country. Okay, a teacher of mine, next. A teacher of mine, Kevin Gotkin, a celebrity amongst us, a celebrity in my life at least, for sure. Kevin Gotkin is an access ecologist, facilitator, researcher, and an artist organizer with Creators Rebuild New York. They have been organizing in the movement for disability artistry since 2016 when they co-founded Disability Arts NYC. They received their PhD from UPenn in 2018 and were a visiting assistant professorship at NYU from 2018 to 2021. Kevin's artistry includes an upcoming series at Lincoln Center called Cultivating Access Ecologies, and an ongoing nightlife organizing with the Remote Access Party Collective. They also run a weekly newsletter. Sign up, Crip News, very important. Let's give a round of applause to all our people. First, we're gonna hear from Maddox. Please come join me. I'm gonna sit.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Just wanted to check in with you about that.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. Really excited to be here with you all today. It's amazing energy. We're doing a lot of visioning, imagining, and that's up my alley. So I'm really excited to talk to you all today. I want to start by saying that the population I like to say I serve and I work for is for youth experiencing homelessness, which I think is unique in this space, right? Because oftentimes when we think about youth who've experienced homelessness, a lot of times these are the very youth that have been failed by the systems that were put in place to protect them, and at the same time is one of the communities that faces some of the biggest distrust. So for me, I always think about we have an opportunity now with direct cash transfers, guaranteed income, to use cash as a disruptor, especially when we think about systems and institutions. I'll start by saying that I never felt comfortable before in my community when we were talking about ending youth homelessness, because I would see that year after year we're funding a homelessness problem and crisis. So I was like, I don't know if we're really working to end youth homelessness. But it wasn't until the work of direct cash transfers that I started to see we are actually now working to end youth homelessness, because we can actually see and imagine young people walking away from homelessness versus putting money and funding a system that will continue to harm them year after year. So for me, my meditation is, if cash is power, then we need to be using that cash to go into communities directly and not to institutions that harm them. We have to acknowledge that there's money out in the world, and that very money is being used to continue to build these institutions that harm them, right? Like when I see that, I think about, buildings and all this kind of like gray that we continue to put out in the world. And what if we were to kind of dismantle that a little bit and invest more in communities so that we can see healthy, thriving community, people experiencing joy, laughter, like in that video we saw, right? We're oftentimes okay with creating systems that are just putting people to survive and in survival mode, but we don't think that people don't just need to survive. People need to thrive and live self-autonomous, abundant lives. I like that it was brought up the work of Martin Luther King and the Black Panthers. I often live off of those philosophies, especially the Black Panthers, because they were very adamant, right, yes, and making sure that people's survival needs were met so that they can start to engage and think critically and live their own self-autonomous lives. They knew that people needed housing, people needed healthcare, people needed money, people needed resources. Before we can ask somebody to come organize with us, right, we have to make sure that that's being met. And I like to think that that's our work now. We have opportunity now, right, to change our systems, our policies, to remove the bureaucracies that are often in place, and make sure that we are being grounded in communities and people, and that we're no longer okay with continuing to build up corporate greed and institutions, and that we work to dismantle that and put the money behind communities, put the money behind people so that people can thrive and live the self-autonomous, abundant lives that we were here and made to create. And I'd like to end by saying I'm an Afrofuturist. I love to think about the intersection between organizing and sci-fi, and a lot of the work we're going to be doing here the next 2 days, it is about visioning. So I'm going to do a little remix of a Walida Marisha quote, and if any of you are familiar, she's a sci-fi writer. She typically also writes with Adrienne Marie Brown. And one of my favorite quotes from her is that when organizers are able to imagine a world, typically she says without prisons, without borders, in our case, we're imagining a world where we are giving people money directly, then that means that we can actually make them happen. But in order for us to make them happen, we have to be able to vision and imagine that. And I want to call in the importance of dreaming, visioning, and imagining in this work, when I think about my ancestors, dreaming was something that was very important to them in order to imagine freedom. So I want to call you all in to definitely tap into your dreaming. I love, Mara, what you said about research becoming healing, right? Healers. So I definitely want to encourage you all to tap into your visioning work and open up your mind and dream, because that's something that's important. And as our time goes in our society, it's definitely something that is kind of being taken away from us. So definitely encouraging us to be dreamers and disruptors.
Incredible. Nicole, take us away.
Hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here. Nicole Laporte, as they said, I'm the Communications Director for Equity and Transformation. And I'm excited to be here to share our work and our work with our Guaranteed Income Pilot Program, which is the first only guaranteed income program for post-incarcerated individuals. And we've grown exponentially over the past 2 years, which is really, really exciting. But I'd like to just say a little bit about equity and transformation, because I think this is the perfect panel for it, because our work is intersectional. Our work, all our work, policy work, programs, initiatives directly relate to dismantling anti-Black racism, building equity for informal workers, decriminalizing post-incarcerated people, and limiting the barriers that we face after incarceration. So with that, I would say that by meditation, if cash is power, then it's evident why the system limits resources in our communities, right? Because taking away that power takes away our freedom. So we're here today to reimagine what it's like if we're able to gain that freedom back and change the system.
Hi, y'all. I'm Amy Durrence, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm brimming with excitement and gratitude to be sharing space with each and every one of you today, as well as these amazing advocates on this panel. Before I get started, I did want to flag, I'm going to be sharing some data and stories related to gender-based violence. Many of us in this room are likely survivors ourselves, so that could bring up some difficult emotions. I want to invite everyone to take care of yourself however you need. If it's getting up, leaving the room, taking a break, doodling in your notes, really whatever works for you. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about my personal journey to this work. So I began my advocacy for survivors of gender-based violence as a student attorney in my law school's domestic violence clinic, where I represented survivor clients in going to court and getting restraining orders. So through this experience, I very quickly realized that existing temporary crisis support available for survivors, like emergency shelters, short-term public assistance, and the restraining orders I was supporting my clients in getting, while necessary, were woefully insufficient. We'd walk out of the courthouse with that court order in hand, but what my clients really needed were groceries, diapers, debt relief, credit repair, savings, permanent housing. What my clients really needed was financial security and financial healing. And each and every one of my clients' specific financial needs were unique. But we'd be there with that piece of paper, that court order, it couldn't achieve or meet any of those needs for folks. Without real financial support, many of my clients remained trapped in cycles of violence, quite frankly, because they couldn't afford otherwise. And unfortunately, my clients' stories aren't unique. 1 in 2 trans folks and 1 in 2 cis women are subjected to some form of gender-based violence by an intimate partner in the United States. 1 in 2. And the number one obstacle to safety for survivors is financial insecurity. In fact, 84% of survivors say that not having enough money to support themselves or their kids is their biggest barrier to safety. The stark reality is that being subjected to gender-based violence is extremely expensive. The CDC estimates that the average lifetime cost for cis women for domestic violence is $104,000. And we know that this is an underestimate because it doesn't take into account the additional and significant costs of economic abuse, which occurs when a harm doer controls or exploits a survivor's financial resources. Economic abuse can look a lot of different ways. It can look like a harm doer putting a survivor on an allowance and demanding receipts for every purchase made. preventing a survivor from going to work or looking for a job, incurring significant debt in a survivor's name without their knowledge or consent, controlling a survivor's bank account. And economic abuse is extremely prevalent. It shows up in 99% of domestic violence cases. Simply put, gender-based violence is financially devastating for most people. So where do we go from here? Well, support for survivors must expand beyond crisis interventions. And rather than trying to create one-size-fits-all solutions from the top down, we've got to trust that survivors are the experts in their own lives. And survivors know what they need to get and stay safe. And what survivors have told us they need is cash. Yes. In fact, survivors who are a part of our safety fund program who received a grant from us identified cash to spend as they see fit as their top most urgent need to get and stay safe. So if cash is power, it's the power to permanently disrupt cycles of violence. If cash is power, then cash is safety. If cash is power, then it's the power to thrive rather than merely survive. At FreeFrom, we're working to create an expanded ecosystem of economic support with and for survivors of gender-based violence that is so robust that every single survivor in the US, no matter who they are, will be able to access the support that they need to get and stay safe. And universal basic income is an essential element of that ecosystem. As one, I wrote down a quote, as one survivor who received a grant from us said, "I would hope that my representatives acknowledge that most survivors already deal with financial abuse and control as to how we can or should spend our money. They should take the opportunity to support us and give us the freedom and trust us to use the help the best way that we can." Thanks.
Hey y'all. Audio's okay? Yeah? Okay. Just real quick, someone dropped a $5 bill by table 1. If that's yours, maybe go grab it. Or if it's some like brilliant like natural experiment, work. I'll just do a quick visual description in case that's helpful for folks. You can't miss me if you're sighted. I look like a highlighter, like a walking highlighter. I have that acid green, like neon yellow green color as a beanie and also as an oversized work shirt. I'm a white person with a mustache, dangly earrings, and then the lower half of my body is pretty boring. It's just like boots and pants. I just want to say I'm so honored to be here. I'm really new to this work. I have incredible teachers. Mara is one of my most important teachers. 2 colleagues that are also here, Naja Gordon, Jamie Hand, and on the live stream is Isaiah Madison. Incredible people at Creatives Rebuild are helping me understand this movement. So here's what I'm learning. If cash is power, then that power can hurt sometimes. So I'll give you an example of some stuff that's happening for us in the program that we run. It's not a pilot, anyway, another conversation. So for disabled folks who use assistance programs like supplemental security income or social security disability insurance, being a part of a guaranteed income program or pilot can include what we're started to call the double cliff experience. Because if you opt into the program, the means testing for those public benefits programs often means that you have to reduce or eliminate the benefit that you had planned often your life around. And then, except for, I think, Cook County Promise, most of the programs are temporary, right? So then you have another cliff at the end of the guaranteed income program where you're then left without anything. And so that's an example of the way that disability justice and this movement, I think, are provoking some really interesting questions. I think our organizing needs to take on the things that make guaranteed income so urgent, because those also become the same reasons that guaranteed income program design is so difficult to reach disabled folks. I also, in my world, have always thought of like money power as quite opposed to people power. And in this work, they're kind of coming together. So I also wanted to offer that if cash is power, it's not the only kind. Artistry is also power. I really don't even need to say anything more about that. That has just been serving already at the conference. But access is also power. So the way that we do our organizing, the actual form it takes, like an invitation for you to get cozy today and make sure your access needs are met, and that you can ask for what you need and not just like assume that you're going to be uncomfortable or whatever. This is a way that we build our movement in form and in content. And I think that allows us to have satisfaction, it allows us to expand, it allows us to model intersectionality. So that's what I got.
Come on, yes. Did y'all notice some themes? Whoop, there's my pen cap.
I heard a lot of themes. I heard the word thrive several times. I heard the phrase freedom. I'm thinking about, when I think about Chicago, I think about jazz as well, and I think about the freedom principle, right, as a jazz ensemble. I would love to talk more with all of you around systems, right? I think all of what the work that you've described, the questions that we're holding around the movement and what we do next, all have some sort of interface with systems, disrupting, working within, working around, working outside. So I wanted to see if any and all could share a little bit about what are some systems that basic income can be changing, ought to be changing, and how can basic income address that?
I'm happy to kick us off.
Yeah, get in there, Amy.
So right now, the majority of available support for survivors of gender-based violence is crisis interventions, focusing on those moments of really acute crisis like extreme physical violence or in the aftermath of a sexual assault. But survivors don't live only in crisis, right? There's all these things that happen before and all these things that happen after temporary support has expired. So we're really missing these opportunities to support people before they reach that moment, so hopefully they never have to. So the sort of system that's in place now, the framework for resources and support for survivors actually requires somebody to get hurt before they can get help. And that's something that's really exciting about universal basic income in the gender-based violence space, because this is something that can be constant. This is something that can start before anybody reaches those moments to hopefully help folks avoid them. And I can offer an example from our safety fund program here. We had one individual who got a grant from us who was able to use a $250 one-time cash grant to fix their car. And they shared with us that fixing their car allowed them to get to, they had court-ordered visitation custody meetings with a harm doer. And this harm doer had threatened, if you are even 1 minute late to even one of these custody visitations, I'm gonna take you to court. This was a way to continue the harm, to try to continue to deplete this person's financial resources. And so because this individual was able to use that $250 grant to fix their car, they were able to make all of these visitation meetings on time. And so what this really meant for this person was they were able to avoid not only potentially losing custody of their child, but also all of the costs that are associated with fighting a custody battle in court, things like paying for an attorney, having to miss work, having to find and pay for childcare. And so with just one-time flexible cash grant, this person was able to avoid that peak crisis moment. And so that's really the power of universal basic income. It's meeting survivors where they are on their journey, rather than forcing them to wait until the worst possible things happen to get help. And that's really the system I think that UBI is pushing back on in the gender-based violence space.
Yes, that reminds me of, so at Point Source Youth, we have two kind of direct cash transfer initiative. We have one direct cash transfer as a housing outcome, where the cash is unconditional, and we're hoping that young people are able to obtain housing with it. But then we also have direct cash transfers as prevention, which serves more as a diversion fund. and is trying to divert you from even entering the shelter system to begin with because of the harms that we know that happen. So I love that you mentioned us also as a society focusing on before the harm happens, what could we do, what can we have in place so that people don't have those years of trauma that can have ripple effects on the ways that the things that they're able to access, what else they're able to do in life. And I feel for me that's one of the ways that we're doing now is changing the shelter system as we know it, right? While I always say, like a disclaimer when I talk about this, I do believe that there's a place for shelter as a crisis intervention point, but we can't put all our eggs in the shelter basket because we don't have a shelter problem, we have a housing problem. So we need to be investing more in housing-based solutions, and for me, with direct cash transfers, we are seeing that young people are able to obtain housing. Even if young people are in shelter temporarily, they're able to access money to pay for Airbnb or hotels, right, so that they don't have to be in shelter, especially when it comes to LGBTQ young people who we know face higher rates of discrimination and violence. So for me, that's one area in the homelessness system a system that we're impacting with guaranteed income, direct cash transfers. And then I also think about the policy landscape, right? I'm from New York, so we got NYCHA, New York Housing Authority, right? And historically, if you've ever heard the horror stories, right? There's all this paternalism and distrust in people and all this monitoring and surveillance of what do people do with their money? Are they actually poor? And, we think about welfare. All these systems historically have kind of had this thing about it, this conditionality of, well, you have to show us X, Y, Z, or we have to investigate X, Y, Z in order for you to receive services. And with our movement now, we're able to, like in New York, we were able to get a waiver so that our young people's SNAP and benefits weren't affected with direct cash transfer, right? And I've heard of guaranteed income pilots in Baltimore where people's housing wasn't affected because they were able to get guaranteed income, right? So in one way, it's also pushing us to remove barriers from and bureaucracies from our policies as well. That shows us that if we work together, we could do this even at a federal level with policy. We can actually move policy as well.
And I would just like to add, because, they touched on the, like government-assisted programs too, right? And a lot of times we get caught in these government-assisted programs where we can't get work because we're going to lose our benefits. I have also had strokes. I have lupus, so I've also been on disability. Not only being formerly incarcerated, I've also have my disability where I was scared to get a job because I didn't know if I was going to get sick again, and then I would lose my disability, which was really scary. So I think that's really important that guaranteed income could come in here and give you that possibility and that ability to move and that ability to build yourself up and build a career, if you so want, a career or be in the formal economy. But so I think that's a really important part of the guaranteed income movement is that people are able to do that and have that access where they don't feel limited and they don't feel stuck and they don't feel that they're going to be stuck in the same silo for the rest of their life because they're scared. They're scared they don't know what's going to happen in the future. I also think one of the most important things for us to eat that it disrupts is the carceral system and policing. We work with the informal community, so a lot of these people are criminalized. They get out of prison, they're in reentry, and they have barriers to employment. So they go into informal work, whatever that may be, and then they're criminalized for it. And it's this cycle of going back to prison that I think with our guaranteed income program, that it really doesn't have them in survival mode, right? Where they can have that option. It's not, $500 is not gonna make you rich, but it is gonna give you that ability to know that you have that little cushion in back, that if you are at risk of being criminalization and risk of going back or on parole, probation or whatever you're on, you have that you have that cushion there that okay, it's a little easing, right? Like you feel that you don't have to go out right now to get what you need because you can't get formal employment.
I feel like my newcomer to this organizing makes me want to produce questions instead of confidence and things. So maybe a question that's coming up from this prompt, Mara, is does cash dismantle ableism as a structure, as a structure that runs so deeply through so many other structures. Like as Nicole just said, like the amount of the programs and pilots that y'all run is really not enough to live on, actually. I'm really curious, like, if folks know the organizers of the National Welfare Rights Organization, they used the term adequate income, a real adequate income, meaning enough to feed your family and take care of yourselves. And right now, without solid benefits protections, making sure that people do not lose the SSDI check or the SSI check or SNAP or all of the assistance programs people build their lives around, direct cash transfer programs are not working for disabled folks and for other folks who are in these programs. So, I wonder about that. Like, will cash get this stage to not have stairs? Not trying to be shady at anyone, because I'm talking about ableism, which operates through and like above us in many ways. So I guess, I think there's like this real magical power to people getting money that is not tied to all of the usual bullshit, the surveillance that comes with being in a Social Security Administration program. Really, there's something magical about giving people. That's what I think unites a lot of us here, right? And I think we also have to recognize that is so limited in how it actually is getting to a lot of people. And our aspirations around like how we can reach so many people really need to be checked by the intransigence, like the potency of ableism.
Everybody hear that? Yes. I'm thinking what all of you have shared reminds me of actually how Hala teed us off just a few moments ago as a reminder to us all of that. Who are we answering to? Who's driving the movement, right? Who gets to decide what the permanent right legislation that we're all trying to commit to and make happen? How does that happen? Are these folks at the table? Are the people who we carry on our shoulders, who we come from, who we care about our communities? Are they at the table? And I think that's some of what you've all described in different ways. I'm wondering if we can also talk about this. We chatted about this briefly when we had our little prep call. The reality that all of the pilots, the incredible work that's happening in these pilots, challenging as it might be, have all of these demographics within them, right? We tend to think about our pilots as serving one specific kind of person, right? And yet here we are talking about intersectionality, and the reality, Nicole, that you just described, right, that you faced, already puts all of these pilots all in one place, right? I think, Amy, you've talked much about how disability is part and parcel of talking about survivors. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you all have any thoughts to share with this group here around how do we move beyond our pilots as demographics in one square and into this messier conversation, but necessary messiness around intersectional justice work. Another way you might think about that is, what are the other kinds of power? I loved that, Kevin, earlier. I told you we were doing hard questions, everyone, you know.
Well, I think the important part about this work, and I know like creating our pilot, is collecting the data, but also most importantly collecting stories from people. Because we do find that with everybody's story, there is some intersectionality. There is somebody that has dealt with homelessness. There is somebody that's dealt with addiction. There is somebody that's dealt with domestic violence. So we see that, and we look at, and sometimes it's overwhelming, right? To look at people and to see all these different issues and try to say, okay, we have an answer for it. And we have to understand that sometimes we don't, but we can see what helps. And I think that that's why research is so important in this, because we do have to deal with politicians, right? Sometimes, and we're looking at policy change. So we have to bring the facts with it too. And I do think that from everything that we've seen, with guaranteed income. And like I said, like the $500 is not going to make somebody rich, but it is going to help in certain circumstances if they need food, to not go to alternatives, so that right then they could keep themselves safe, whatever safety looks like to them. So I think that, I always look at it like data is a really important part, but also telling the story. And one of the things is, like, we look at recidivism and people going back into prison and the stories that are told there, and really changing that narrative and looking at the system, how it criminalizes these individuals that have records. So I think that's one really important part of it.
Yeah, you made me think too, like, across the board with a lot of these population, what's at stake if we don't have this, right? That's something to think about, right? And how with money too, that there's potential to reverse adversities. When we think about, young people experiencing homelessness, or when folks don't have access to money or jobs because they're being discriminated against if they're LGBTQ, right? Then they maybe have to go into underground markets, which sometimes does put them at risk. So how does something like money protect these folks? And then also, how are we building our pilots to be inclusive of these different folks, different identities, right? How are we thinking about sex workers? How are we thinking about young people who have been like incarcerated but in the past, or folks in general who have been incarcerated, and making sure that we are building pilots that are inclusive and are aware of the institutional trauma that folks have experienced, right? When I think about working with youth in foster care and direct cash transfer, right? Like, somebody who might have potentially stripped you from your family is now telling you, I'm gonna give you $3,000 a month, right? Like, you gotta think about that. Like, well, that young person might be a little skeptical. Like, you took me away from my family and now you're gonna give me money, right? But if we're aware of that institutional harm and trauma, then maybe we could talk about it, call it what it is, and provide extra support and do some of that, what I like to call that rehabilitation work that folks have experienced, especially folks who have been harmed by society, like folks who have been incarcerated and folks who have been pushed to the margins. So we have to, kind of work twice as hard to make sure that our pilots are inclusive and are also, like I say, doing a level of rehabilitation of that institutional trauma.
Yeah, and I'm thinking not just our pilots, but our planning, our procedures, our, right, all the reports that we're writing, our next steps, how we do meetings, all of the above, right? It's powerful.
I always just come back to the prevalence of gender-based violence in the US. 1 in 2 trans folks, 1 in 2 cis women. That means that there are survivors in this room, on this stage. There's survivors in every single one of the incredible pilots across the country and programs across the country. And so we have to be thoughtfully, intentionally designing these things with survivors' unique circumstances and needs in mind. How are we ensuring that the individuals that we're hoping to actually get and benefit from this money are the ones that are actually getting and benefiting from this money, for example? And also, 56%, I think, of survivors who got a grant from us in our last round identified as disabled. We know that survivors are disproportionately, a lot of times, system impacted, whether that's through incarceration, child protective services, things of that nature. In particular, of course, Black and brown survivors. And in fact, 24% of survivors actually get arrested when the police are called out to a domestic violence incident. So we're all serving the same communities. And so what does that mean for our design? We've got to think about survivors' unique circumstances and needs, but we also need to think about how all of these other intersecting sort of oppressive systems impact a person: white supremacy, ableism, all of these pieces. And for the way that we sort of approach this at FreeFrom is the best practice is to lead with trust and flexibility. Because that's really going to be, and listening to the folks served. What do you need? How are you going to be able to really benefit from these? So really, that's what it's all about. I think is trust, flexibility, and openness in how we design all of these programs.
Well, I just want to give a small plug for the panel that Maddox and I and other people are going to be on here right after this in this space. And also there's the DC breakout, there's the other breakouts, yes. But I think we're gonna get like deeper into this question of like, how do we do the how is the work, the organizing that we're doing actually kind of already fundamentally always needs to be intersectional because the systems cut across identity categories. Like, really good example, Amy, of I come from a tradition of disability rights and disability justice where people have claimed disability. But that's a small section of the people who are disabled and maybe don't use it as an identity category. Yeah, I guess the way I've been thinking about this is like, we need to be in our organizing, showing up in the spaces where our programs and pilots are not working for people. So like, I just come back to the Social Security Administration because it is such a profound dumpster fire. Let's just think about I think it's 4.2 million people who are out of work because of long COVID. Long haulers also have a long haul to get to a disability determination from the Social Security Administration to even be able to access something like SSI or SSDI. Years to be able to even get support. How does a program intervene in that moment? Maybe it's a little easier to imagine than after, when then they might decline to be involved in a guaranteed income program because then they'll lose the SSI or SSDI check like we were just talking about. So I feel like maybe if there's a moment in the program administration when like there's a lot of work to get things set up, there's a lot of work to get things going, and then it starts to get going. And then maybe if there's like a change up in like the work that needs to happen once a program is kind of actually underway, is there free time then where we can show up, try to figure out like who is organizing within the Social Security Administration to change some of this shit? So yeah, just to say, like, we know these like points of contact and friction where programs are actually not working for people, and then we need to show up at that limit and then continue the organizing. So the organizing for basic income should include the organizing for why basic income is so necessary.
Well, and that really brings up, for me, we started this program, the only national no strings attached cash grants program for survivors of gender-based violence. That's a mouthful, in the US. And we saw that back when, during Biden's campaign trail, he had line item $5 billion with a B, dollars for direct cash grants for survivors. And we were like, oh, my God, this is so exciting. But wait, we know that they're gonna mess this up if they do it. Of course, spoiler alert, they didn't do it. But we were like, we need to be talking about how is this gonna really work for people? Where does it not work? And how can we make sure that it works? So we actually went back to 1,000 people who had already received a grant from us and said, tell us, like, how can we make something that's gonna work for you? And so we learned a ton about, for example, over half of survivors said that they don't have any proof of what they've been subjected to. So things like police reports and court orders, and we can understand why that's the case. Why folks don't wanna necessarily call the police, and why some folks don't wanna go to court or can't go to court. Also learned that 84% of folks said, look, if I have to sign up for a parenting class or a financial literacy class and pay for that kind of a class in order to get resources or support, which we know happens a lot, I'm not gonna be able to use that support. And so we were able to really kind of drill down on what are the pain points and how can we build something that's really gonna work for people? But we did it by going to people and asking, right? Not trying to guess. We just said, tell us, please, how is this gonna work for you? How is it not gonna work for you? And we got to, people need flexibility, people need trust, people don't need to be surveilled, people need to be able to spend their money however they decide they need to spend it for themselves to stay safe.
Yes, I'm thinking about how do we employ the trust and faith that we're trying to, embody? Like, how do we have that show up in every stage of our work, at the beginning, the middle, the end, beyond, the forever? I want to ask one more question from all of you, brilliant people. I think there's something about intersectionality that lends itself to solidarity and what solidarity could be, and maybe that solidarity ought to be necessary for us to do what we're trying to do. So I'd love to hear your thoughts briefly on what solidarity could look like. for the live streamers as well. What could it feel like, look like? What do you imagine?
Can I? Could I pose this to you, Mara?
Actually, no, I have the power to not answer.
Okay, fully. You have so much going on. I just want to say Mara has taught me a lot about this. I feel like this is a dream space that you and I are in. And I just want to say, like, Mara Coffey Peterson, absolute icon. Like, yeah. Like, anyway, I just know that you have thought a lot about this question, and I would love to hear your thoughts. But if you need to stay in moderator mode, like, fully.
I'm not going to answer that. I'm not here for the moment. That was really generous. Thank you, Kevin.
I don't know. For me, I think about one, like I mentioned earlier, the importance of being open to vision and being open to even new ideas, right? I think that oftentimes we're told no, right? Like, oh, stay in your lane. Things are just the way they are. Things can't change, right? And like that's old rhetoric. Like, look at where we are today. Who would have thought, we'd be here in this room in Chicago, maybe even 6 years ago, right? Talking about, if you weren't already doing this work, right? Or like doing the building blocks, talking about giving people money across so many marginalized identities and folks who have been, facing disparities for so long. So I think that's number one, is to, in solidarity with each other, like encourage each other to be open, to dream, to imagine, and make space for innovations and new creations in your communities and your organizations and your workplace. And then I think about the importance of support, right? And like having a team to bring things to life as well, and like lean on each other when times get tough. And I also think the importance of, like studying our history and our freedom fighters, our radical fighters, right? From the past, whose backs we're standing on. Like, Martin Luther King, he was talking about this in the 1960s, right? So like now we're doing that work today. So I like to think about us here now, right? Like one of the quotes that I often reflect on is, when you're busy working towards the future, you don't oftentimes take a moment to acknowledge the present. So I think that that's important too, right? To really take a moment to realize where we are, the work that we're doing, the importance of it, the ripple effects that this has on the future. I don't know if people are into astrology, but I remember there's a part of your astrology chart that it talks about what your generation are gonna do, and I always thought that, for me, it's that my generation is gonna change the world, and I'm like, yeah, I believe it, right? But I'm also like, yeah, right, what are we gonna do, like, And I think about it now, and I'm like, oh, we are changing the world, right? We're now moving a different way. We think about gender, it's more inclusive, right? We're talking about pronouns, sexuality a different way, and even our social programming, when we think about guaranteed income, direct cash transfer, right? With federally, what has been done historically, we're undoing a lot of those things. So right now we are doing that. So I think it's just important to kind of take those moments to pause, look at the people you're around, and acknowledge each other and support each other, and as much as possible undo a lot of the harms that we've been conditioned to bring up as well, right? Like white dominant culture and how that has affected our society, our policies, our research, and make sure that it's being people-centered and inclusive, and that we're moving at the rate of the people, not profit and things that don't center people.
I think that's so right on, Maddox, and I would just add the openness and like leaning into abundance. I think that, especially in particular in the, and I can only really speak to the gender-based violence movement, I guess, but there is a lot of sort of scarcity mindset because we've been like, okay, everybody's competing over the same funding, right? And so it breeds this competition, and that's a lie. There's more, there's enough for everyone. And so rather than trying to compete over not enough, we should come together and demand more, and lean into that abundance.
Yes.
So.
Ask for more.
Yes.
I love that. What's on your mind, Nicole?
I would just say, like, when I look at solidarity in the movement, I think it starts with being able to listen. Sometimes we want to have all the answers, and we want to have all the solutions, and we want it right away. And we don't have a full understanding of other people's situations. We don't have a full understanding of how we have for instance, we have a reparations campaign that talks about reparations for survivors of the war on drugs. And that doesn't exclude chattel slavery, because that's an extension of chattel slavery, is the war on drugs. So I think it's just like listening and understanding and meeting people where they are and coming together. I think that's one of the things that divides us, is like a misunderstanding, is not really having the, like, not just listening, sometimes you just gotta be still, listen, and then you could find ways to work together. And we found that in so many situations when we're out in the community, just everyday people that didn't know something, and then, well, like, this person's going through this, oh, I didn't know that. And then you see people coming together, and I think that's what we need in this movement, instead of, like, it's not a competition, it's an understanding of coming together.
Yeah, I think, like, solidarity, what's coming up for me is, like, getting sneaky in a system that you know doesn't work, instead of just, like, hewing to its, like, overdetermined, like, power over us or whatever. Like, I'm thinking of benefits counseling as maybe part of a program design for guaranteed income. We need benefits counseling. That's rad. Love benefits counselors. But sometimes it's like, if the counseling just kind of leaves someone with like and so then you'll be left with 0 from this public benefit. Like, will you enroll in this program? It's like, that's maybe not so helpful, but maybe there's something called like benefits strategy, where you like look at like the income exclusions for a public benefit eligibility, like, you know, and think like, do we want to claim any of those income exclusions? Like, could you? Is there stuff that we haven't thought of that actually could be part of this? Yeah, strategy, which is like, I think it needs to build trust, is like a lot of what folks have said already. You need to have like collaboration and not just kind of consultation or something that's very like formalized. And you need to actually feel good with each other, which takes time. So maybe solidarity is also slow and at a pace that's adequate and not just like, you know, I don't know, breakneck or whatever. So yeah, I think of that. Like there's so many ways that we actually can get people cash, but they might need to be sneaky sometimes. So this is my little, if you want to talk about civil disobedience and cash transfers, I would love to do that. Yeah.
Yes, so abundance, study. We have people, we are learning all the time. I'm learning every day. I don't know about y'all. Be good students. Listen, be sneaky with your strategy. I'm thinking about that someone else has said this, our struggles are all tied up with each other, and that's an appreciation and understanding of what solidarity, right? Solidarity comes after that understanding. I hope that y'all talk to somebody new today. I hope you all give these amazing people a big round of applause as well. Yes, great.
And each other.
We have to start with the hard things, and then we have to do fun things, and then we have to do more things. That's what conferences are about, yes? So in a moment, we're gonna hop off stage. We're gonna have a 15-minute break right at 11 a.m. The next round of breakouts will begin. I'll just give you a sneak peek. There's signage places. There's people with tags who can support and help. You can go outside if you need to get some air, right? This would be the time to do it. Get a coffee, get some water, use the restroom, and then come back, find the room you want to be in. In this room, the session will be Nothing About Us Without Us, and get deeper with Kevin and Maddox and a couple of other fun people.
And Mara.
And me. And the other two gallery spaces, we have the DC Guaranteed Income Building Intersectional Coalitions, gorgeous. We have the In Her Hands, shout out, a blueprint for community-led pilots in Gallery 2. As a reminder, if you are a speaker for this session, make sure you get your mic situation. I see you in the back. That's what we got to do. Understand? Okay. Round of applause. See you all at 11.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.